Here's a pressure you probably know all too well as a pastor. People don't usually tell you when they are stuck in their faith journey. Now, they tell you when they're frustrated, they tell you when your sermon didn't go well, but they don't often, raise their hand on Sunday and say, I think I'm done growing. You know what they do instead, right? They just quietly kind of drift. At first, just a little, then it's maybe a lot more, and then one day, you haven't seen them for months, and you don't know what happened. And by the time most churches notice that this drift has occurred, it's turned into a disappearance. And there's probably no really going back from that. And worse, it isn't just that they won't come back to your church. They might not go to any church. They may begin to even drift further from Jesus, not just from his church. That's why today we're going to talk about 4 warning signs your discipleship pathway isn't working. 4 warning signs that your discipleship pathway is not working. And of course, how to fix it. You know me, we're going to fix it. Because this quiet drift, it doesn't have to win, and it should not win. There's too much at stake for us to ignore that. So think about it. We spend so much time, don't we, as pastors, planning Sunday services, developing small groups, writing curriculum, creating opportunities for growth. But then there's this reality, right? Even with the best programs, the best buildings, the best, name your best, people can still stall out on their discipleship journey. And then when they do, the pressure on us, it really rises, right? The pressure for you, the pressure for your staff, for your volunteers. And I know, because I've been there, you start to wonder. You ask questions like, what did we miss? Why aren't people moving forward? And then maybe one of the hardest questions is it me? Is it the model? Here's the truth though, right? Discipleship, it stalls out, and these discipleship stall outs are kind of normal because they happen a lot during these transitional moments during a discipleship pathway. So they happen to everybody, they happen to every church. The problem actually isn't the stall, because it's going to happen on some level. The problem is not noticing the stall soon enough to intervene and begin to engage people to re-move them forward. That's why understanding the warning signs becomes so critical. So let me walk through the 4 stages of a discipleship pathway: seeker, student, shaper, steward. Okay, you've probably heard those if you listen to anything I do or read anything I write. Those are these 4 stages. We're going to start with people in our discipleship pathway. And so a seeker, a student, a shaper, a steward. Those are the 4 categories of people. And let's look at where each of these commonly stall out. So our first one, seekers. Now, remember, just as a reminder, seekers are spiritually curious. Okay, we call them seekers. That's probably obvious. They're probably not ready for a commitment yet. They are not believers, but they're curious. They're curious enough to show up to your local church, whether it's a Sunday morning or an event. So they're not anti-church. They're not God haters. However, they're not believers either. They're kind of leaning in the direction, but they're curious. They want to know more. They're seeking something. So how does a seeker stall out? Well, a seeker stalls when they feel unseen. Unseen. Now, this is a big deal. I think for a long time, I did this. I led a church that acted this way. We wanted to prioritize anonymity. And I don't think anonymity is a bad thing. But if a person needs to be seen and everything's always dark and they're always sitting by themselves, well, it's not a great thing. So we want to make being known easy. Even if they want to be anonymous for a while, that's okay. But we want them to feel seen. So we can do that not by engaging with them in a way they're not ready, but by acknowledging that they're in the room, welcoming people who are kind of curious or skeptical or trying things out, letting them know that they're not the only one like that that's with us today. Those are the kind of ways that we can let them feel seen. Now, what are the warning signs, though, that a seeker is beginning to stall? Well, here's a couple. The biggest one might just be really inconsistent attendance. Now, granted, in our current world, it seems that can happen to everybody, and we can address that in a different pressure pod. But inconsistent attendance, if they say they're going to be somewhere and then they don't show up, if they are planning on being somewhere and then they don't make it, right? So like some surface level questions, Are they, if they're asking, sorry, if they're asking kind of surface level questions, but they're not going deeper than that. It's a way to know that maybe they're beginning to stall. If they're kind of interested in your environments, but they're not really that interested in having any sort of faith conversation, that's a definite warning sign. It's a red flag that they're probably heading to a stall. So, what they really need is actually kind of simple. They need connection. Connection really helps with frequency of attendance. Connection helps deeply with moving beyond just service level questions. Connection obviously is required to have faith oriented conversations, not just showing up to the kid thing that you offered that their kid enjoyed, right? So they need connection. So one intentional conversation or coffee can really keep their curiosity alive. So if you begin to see any of those warning signs with a seeker, inconsistently attending, not really digging below surface level questions, or just not really interested in a faith conversation, that's a great opportunity. It's a red flag to intervene with a deeper connection, deeper connection. Coffee, a breakfast, whatever that looks like in your world. Okay, students. How do we deal with students? So, as a reminder, students are new believers. Okay, they stall when discipleship begins to feel academic. That's when they stall. Now, I love this because we call them students. And the reason we call them students is because they are learning about the faith right now. They're new in their faith, right? Their brains are exploding. Think about like an infant or a toddler. I don't mean that to be demeaning, but when you see like an infant or especially a toddler, man, their heads are just exploding with new information and they're so hungry for it, right? Sometimes too hungry, and then we hit the terrible twos. And so when you think about a student, that's what they're doing. I mean, they are digging in, they are excited, they are fired up. However, when discipleship begins to feel academic, that's kind of when, it's all information and there's really no opportunity for application. Well, that becomes a problem. So, what are the warning signs that a student is beginning to drift a little bit? Let me just give you a couple. Here's one. Passive participation. They show up, but they're not that active. They're not that passionate about anything. They're really not that interested. So they're there, they're participating, but they're kind of very passive in it. That's a warning sign. Treating faith like just one more activity on the calendar. That's a really good warning sign when we see a student doing that. Or like frustration with not learning enough, but an unwillingness to take ownership of what they're learning. That's a big red flag for a student. Now, you can imagine this happens to a lot of students because their life probably has not been being lived according to biblical principles, most likely, at least in every area of their life. And so now they're bumping into things that are new for them, but they're also bumping into things that rub up against how they have been living, how they have been treating people, how they have been using money, how they've been, living with someone else. So all the things that this can bump into. And so an unwillingness to take ownership of this new information, it's a real red flag. So you know what they need, right? Here's what a student needs when we see the warning sign. They just need some application. They need some ways to practice their faith, not just study it, not just learn about it. So when you think about creating application opportunities for a student, sometimes it's personal application, but often it's done best within, you guessed it, connection and community. So find ways to put students together with some people further along who can create some accountability for them, belonging, and of course, care as well. Now, let's talk about our shapers. That's our third category. Shapers, they are believers, and they are shaping now their lives after Christ. That's why we call them shapers. I kind of borrowed this from Rick Warren. If you remember, I don't know how many years ago it was now. It could be 20, 25, I don't know, 20 years ago, The Purpose-Driven Life. But he starts by saying it's not about you, but he has a great chapter in there, if I remember. It could be a section on discovering your shape. It's all about the kind of how God made you, right? So your spiritual gifts, your heart, your abilities, right? That's what it all was, your personality. When you think about a shaper, now they are actively not just applying, but they are shaping their inner lives and their outer lives to be more like Jesus every day. So how do these people stall? Well, they stall when they begin to feel unsupported unsupported. So, what are the warning signs? Well, we see shapers overcommitting to activities without real transformation. That's a warning sign. Resisting harder teachings. I mean, you know this, right? And it's hard. A lot of people come to faith. Probably most people come to faith as a consumer. And now we're wanting them to shift that from consumption to participation to Christ likeness. That's a big shift. I mean, to go from like, hey, come and see to come and die, that's quite a shift. And so resisting harder teachings, it's just a red flag. A growing weary of expectations, not that you're putting them on, but just that they realize in the state of their faith that there are more expectations. That they begin to grow weary of those expectations. And then they start subtly disengaging. Big warning sign. So let me tell you what these people need. They need investment. They need investment. They need leaders further ahead, right, who can affirm their progress and walk beside them as they step into these greater challenges. And you've probably experienced this before, where maybe it was a mentor of yours that told you it was worth it. That yes, it's hard, but on the other side, it's worth it. And you believed them. And you moved forward in your faith, and you did discover, yeah, it really is better on the other side of generosity. It's better on the other side of loving other people who aren't like me. It's better when I can pray for my enemies. And all of that makes life better, right? And you discovered that. So you need people in their lives who can help them invest in them and help them discover that too. All right, last category, stewards. Stewards, these are our most mature believers, okay? They stall when ministry becomes maintenance. So here's some warning signs. When they are serving out of obligation instead of overflow, big warning sign. Protecting comfort over multiplication, that's a warning sign, because stewards should be multiplying. They're stewarding the kingdom and the influence, so they should be multiplying themselves. And of course, subtle cynicism, or maybe just burnout. That's a big warning sign. And so what they really need is renewal. They need some fresh vision. They need new opportunities, and they need a purpose that pushes them beyond just the routine. Really, purpose is a big word for a steward. Without purpose, everything begins to feel like maintenance, but with purpose, it feels like you're on a mission. So how do you prevent these discipleship stallouts? Okay, well, with checkpoints. I mean, you can kind of think about it like preventative maintenance almost on a car, but when you are engaging with a seeker and, a seeker kind of pings your database for the first time, maybe they checked in or whatever, maybe you check in with them. After a student completes a study, check in with them, ask them how it went and help them think about how they can apply it. What about a shaper? Well, when they step into a new leadership role, or maybe they've been in something for not too long, but long enough, check in with them. And when we check in with people, we're not just checking in to say, hey, how's it going? We're checking in knowing where they are in their faith journey and asking very specific questions about how they're growing. For stewards, right? I mean, when they have been serving faithfully for a good long season, check in with them. Check in to make sure that what they're doing feels missional, not just maintenance, right? These check-ins, these checkpoints, they're really not about control, right? They're about care, because they keep your pathway alive, they keep it really personal, and they keep it effective. So here's kind of the pressure relief. When your leaders know what to look for, not just you, right, but other staff members, elders, your core volunteers, when they know what to look for, when they are checking in consistently and they know how different categories of people can stall, when they know what to look for, you don't have to carry that weight alone anymore. Now everyone becomes a part of preventing the drift. So here's your quick action step for this week. I'd love for you to identify just one group of people in your discipleship pathway and add one solid checkpoint for them. Okay, maybe it's asking leaders to follow up with seekers after their second or third visit. Maybe it's building in a reflection conversation after a Bible study ends with the people who participated. You decide the checkpoint. But if you can catch a stalled disciple early, they don't have to become a lost disciple. That's why these checkpoints matter so much. That's actually how you reduce the pressure. And it's how you keep people growing, thriving, and multiplying.